The UAW has recently authorized a strike on automakers, right? And when I say the automakers, I'm talking about Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors. Now, Chrysler is no longer known as Chrysler, is known as Stellantis, all right? But what we call them here is completely different than what it is that y'all call them or how y'all address them in corporate America. I'll give you an example. A lot of y'all like to refer to different things based off of their corporate name. Google is not really Google. Google is known as Alphabet. All right. Google is known as Alphabet. All right. That is the name of the company and what they're listed as on the stock exchange. All right. It's a lot of people that refer to a lot of things. They say friends and family deal when you get in your plan papers to be able to get your discount when you want to buy a car from the big three. We call them A plan papers here in Michigan because that's what they've always been known by, all right? But the UAW is recently authorized a strike on the big three. So I want to break that down for you guys. I know we got a lot of union members out here. We got a lot of people that work for a lot of different companies in which they've gathered together, right, in a unionized type of environment in order to advocate for the best for their workers, right? Also on top of that, it's interesting because when I went out to eat and I went over to Deep Prime this weekend, I was talking to the hostess and I was talking to a lot of different people. And they were telling me that they were actually trying to prepare for a strike on the Detroit 3 casinos. The casinos and a lot of different industries, especially on the heels of what happened with UPS. But we're going to get there. We're going to get there. Let me break it down. Let me give y'all some insight. Let me help y'all to understand of what's going on with regard to the strike. Again, this is the Millionaire Morning Show, the greatest morning show on earth. We get into the money now.
Also breaking, the United Auto Workers voting to authorize a strike in the weeks ahead. Jesse Kirsch now with what it all means if you're in the market for a new car and how it could put a bump in the road for electric vehicles, too.
In a summer of strikes, tonight United Auto Workers could be the next ones walking off the job. Today, the union overwhelmingly authorizing a strike against the big three, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. A strike isn't guaranteed, but now the union has the green light to strike if needed. Demands include a nearly 50% pay bump, traditional pensions, and the right to strike over plant closures.
We have went backwards in wages, backwards in conditions, and so they're signaling that they're tired of it.
Negotiations coming as the industry moves toward an electric future.
For the big three, they need those profits in order to fund the development of electric vehicles. It takes.
Now, let me give you all the insight, right? Because a lot of people is just looking at this as workers need to make more money. Workers need to make more money. All right. So let me break it down for you a little differently. The auto industry, like every other industry, is going to continue to innovate. They're going to continue to innovate, meaning that if you look at the way that Tesla is running or Elon Musk is running Tesla, almost the entire plant is made up of robotics. They've even innovated it so much to where they've removed the ability or the need to have to stamp out more panels, which would then create more profits for the suppliers and create more jobs. And they're doing an entire frame now. They're doing an entire panel or the entire layout of the car is all being stamped as one whole piece, right? If you go through and you do a lot of these plant tours, I watch these videos all the time. I watch BMW, I watch Mercedes. I've watched how they built Rolls Royces. I look at how they continue to innovate when it comes to electric vehicles. One of the things that's happening with electric vehicles is they're driving out the cost, right? So it used to cost a lot of money for them to be able to manufacture an electric battery, right? The battery pack that actually powers the car itself. They're driving out the cost the more that they mass manufacture it, and it's costing less every single day for them to be able to have that. Now, what is that? How does that affect the auto workers? Well, they're not making ICE or internal combustion engines anymore. And it's thousands of parts that they've now removed from the vehicle, which drives down the cost, even though inflation is going up. So the cost of being able to develop into the research and development has gone up, but they're driving the cost out of the vehicles, which then make it easier to make, and you don't need as many people to do so, right? If you look at how many people were on a factory assembly lines back in the day versus what they're doing now, it's completely different. Now, how does this also make sense when it comes to what type of vehicles that they're manufacturing? Well, they want to manufacture the most profitable ones, and they're starting to get out of the business of using overseas manufacturers in order to continue to substantiate what it is that they're doing here. They don't want to be as reliant on China. They now have to depend on semiconductor chips in order to power the majority of the computers and the screens and all of the updates that they have to send over the air and the cloud infrastructure that has to go along with that. They're looking at themselves more as technology companies instead of manufacturers now. And so what that does is it drives away jobs. They don't need as many people in order to do the same thing that they were doing before. Then at the same time, they're driving out the costs associated with it. And so the workers are saying, listen, we need to be protected. That's not what happens in a capitalistic market. What happens in a capitalistic market is profit, competition, and then also innovation is what drives companies to be successful. They don't need as many people putting together stuff on the floor. They need more software engineers and cloud engineers that continue to power the technology aspect of what these companies are doing. And so the union now is banding together and they saying, we want to peel back all of the recessions that we made when everything was under duress and we were filing for bankruptcy and everything was absolutely trash back in the 2008 auto crisis when Obama came in, right? They want to get rid of the two-tiered and almost a three-tiered system, okay? They want to protect jobs, especially now that they see electrification is coming. And they want more guarantees that more work is going to be here in America instead of going over to Mexico or up to Canada, especially now that Trump renegotiated the North American Trade Agreement. And so when we start to evaluate this from a business perspective, it's not just about the union, it's how things are going to affect the United Auto Workers. Now, I'm going to give you another caveat to this, but I'm going to do so after I play a little bit more of the video.
It's fewer people to build an electric vehicle than it does an internal combustion engine vehicle.
When UAW's contracts expire mid-September, roughly 150,000 workers could strike nationwide, slamming the brakes on production. Not ideal if you're looking for a new car.
Our supply is going to last for a couple of months.
In the Chicago suburbs, car dealer John Crane says if a potential strike lasts longer than that,
what could you potentially not be able to find?
Nearly everything is going to get tougher to find as time goes on.
Here's the issue. Now, if you notice, over the past couple of months, I've been doing a lot of videos about car dealers and car dealer lots overflowing with cars. And so a lot of people couldn't understand it. They would say, well, why do they keep making all of these cars? Why are they running overtime? If they can't sell these cars right away, then why are dealer lots filling up with Chargers, Hellcats, F-150s, Ram trucks, Silverados, Silverado HDs, and Chevy Tahoes and Cadillac Escalades and all of these vehicles? And people couldn't understand it. Why are these lots filling up? Well, what the automakers were doing was preparing, because they already knew what the mindset of the workers was going to be. They were preparing for the possibility of a long-term strike, right? And so they're trying to negotiate, and they're saying that they're all negotiating in good faith. But what they're doing is they're allowing for the customers to continue to still be able to purchase the vehicles, even though the United Auto Workers will be on strike. So the question then becomes, if you strike, how long can you hold out before you start to get affected as far as your mortgage, your car payments, your insurance? Everything starts to run out, and then you get back to work. When we negotiate and we going back to the negotiating table, you guys authorized a 97% strike, but how long can you last? And did you save up your money longer than they can last in inventory as far as what it is that they're shipping over into the dealers? See, nobody was taking that into consideration, but when we on these analyst calls and we looking at the profitability and we starting to see how much is on dealership lots and how long can they last and what vehicles are selling and what vehicles is not, and then what's going over to Mexico and what's the strategy, and is this plant going to go out of business, and what's happening over in Indiana, and what's happening in Detroit, what's going on with down south plants, are they trying to unionize over there in Tesla, and so on and so forth. Everything starts to make sense when you start to look at everything from a long-term perspective. And this is why I tell y'all on a regular basis, don't just look at what it is that you have going on right now. Don't make an investment based off of what this current quarter is. Don't make an investment based off of what this 1 year, 2 year strategy is. Pay attention to what the long-term effects is going to be based off of what leadership is communicating, what manufacturing are putting out, what's being sold, what are the prices, what are they trying to do as far as to compete with other automakers long term, and especially when it comes to innovation within the industry as far as electrification. It's a thing. Let me continue to play this.
Stellantis writing discussions with UAW are constructive and collaborative. Ford looks forward to working with the UAW on creative solutions. Tonight, thousands of jobs, billions of dollars, and your new ride on an uncertain road. Jesse Kirsch, NBC News, Niles, Illinois.
Let me play another video because I want to paint the picture from the union's perspective, right? I want you to see what their perspective is of why they are communicating and what it is that's being communicated over into the workers to then, influence them to say we should strike or we didn't strike. And then I'm going to give you my final opinion of whether or not I believe that they should strike and what they should really be looking for instead of what it is that's being communicated over into them.
If you come in to work for Ford now, you can make more at McDonald's or White Castle.
We're on the verge of one of the biggest strikes of the year.
They want you to accept that they make billions in profits, that the leaders make millions in salaries, and we continue to live paycheck to paycheck.
Right now, the United Auto Workers are negotiating a new contract with 3 of the country's top car companies. And negotiations are looking a lot different than they have in years past.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do with their proposal. I'm going to file it in its proper place.
In an industry where jobs have been getting worse and worse over the years, this contract could be a historic win for 150,000 workers. Or it could be another victory for large corporations over the disappearing middle class.
And you guys have to take into consideration who's making these videos. Sometimes the news is reporting on it. Sometimes the union is the ones that's making these videos. So whatever opinion is being communicated, which is why I want to play it from both sides. When you get some information, you want to look at it from all angles. You don't just want to look at the presidential debates based off of what Fox News says. You don't want to look at it just based off of only what CNN says. You don't want to base it off of what just the Huffington Post says. You want to take all sources. That way you can make an informed decision going forward. So now we're looking at it from the perspective of the UAW's perspective, right? In order to get a better understanding of how long this is going to last, what they're looking for, and then how it's going to affect the companies and the workers alike.
We sat down with workers to get the real story of what they're fighting for and how far they're willing to go to get it. For a long time, a job in the largely union auto industry meant good wages and stability. But that's not really the case anymore.
You can't afford nothing, you're working nonstop and you still can't afford it, and you're at one of the jobs that was supposed to be the good job. You're supposed to be standard setting job, but you can barely make ends meet. A lot of people have had to secure second jobs or part-time work that they could go do.
Part of it is that wages haven't kept up with the cost of living. When adjusting for inflation, workers who are hired now make $10 an hour less than they did in 2007.
Now, here's the key, right? Here's the key. Because inflation doesn't also take into consideration industry. What does Anton mean by that? Inflation doesn't necessarily take into consideration industry. So, for example, manufacturing is not just manufacturing anymore. Manufacture has now been melded with technology. It's just a fact. Technology is now the driving innovation behind whether or not somebody can stay in business. That's why you see certain companies go out of business. That's why it's so difficult for you to do a startup. You see a lot of these startup companies and they absolutely go bust and go out of business. You also have a global competition now. It's not just what happens in the United States of America. And so when you take into consideration inflation is largely something that, in my opinion, was manufactured, especially when you talk about what was happening during the pandemic. They shut down these states. They then gave out a bunch of money. They decreased the value of the money, but then the cost of living continued to go up. And then they saddled all of these different companies with the responsibility of meeting the expectation of wage inflation, meaning that once the government then inflicted all of this pain on the consumers then went back to the government and said, you need to force the companies that are then making the profits to make sure that they take care of us as a result of it. So the government is basically saying, listen, I can wash my hands of this because it's not necessarily my responsibility. It's the responsibility of them to pay you a livable wage. It's the responsibility of your union to be able to negotiate on your behalf. It's the responsibility of everybody else. They can pump as much money as they want. They can print as much money as they want. They can devalue your dollar, but it's always going to come back to who the person is that you work for as far as who you hold responsible as to whether or not you should be able to make a livable wage or not. But I don't believe in it. I don't believe in it at all. I believe that you can't depend on anybody or anyone in order to make sure that you are taken care of, including the companies that you work for. If you didn't see this writing on the wall a long time ago, if you wasn't taking advantage of the company-sponsored paid tuition program in order to become educated so that you can switch industries, if you are not leveraging a college tuition and community college in order to continue to get a different skill set because you don't see that this happening, you didn't see what was happening in 2008 and that everybody was being laid off because what was once in an industry, that's like the steel industry. The steel industry is completely transformed than what it once was. I can't depend on that from what it was in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s. The steel industry is different. They need less workers. They've innovated the lines. The pickling line, which is the line in which you clean the steel before it goes into production and they start stamping it into parts, which is what I used to work for in the steel industry, is completely different today than it was when I was working there in the 2000s. Because they had to innovate in order to compete. You only need 1 or 2 people to run an entire line, whereas you needed almost 10 or 12 in order to run it when we was operating in 2000 and I was making $120,000 a year. I could say, well, we can adjust for inflation. And I was going to school back then. I was starting to develop skills back then. It doesn't become the employer's responsibility to make sure you're taken care of. Is it to an extent? Yes. But should you depend on it? Absolutely not, because every single day in industries, they create new industries to replace old industries, which you then have to adapt to if you want to continue to survive. So it's not my responsibility to make sure that you can afford a car. It's my responsibility to make sure that it's the shareholders that they care about, not necessarily the workers. It's your responsibility as an individual to not be dependent on anything or anyone in order to make sure that you're taken care of. If you think that I'm dependent on my regular job in order to make sure that I'm taken care of, if you think I'm dependent on YouTube to make sure that I'm taken care of, man, that's what diversification really is. Diversification is not your portfolio and a bunch of different things. Diversification is your lifestyle. It means that you got to have a side hustle, a third hustle, something in the tank, something that you're working on 10 years from now in order to make sure that you continue to win. And then also the foundation that you got going on right here in order to ensure that you're okay, that you can feed your family. You got the thing that you got going on right now, then you got the other things that you then depend. Yo, we are no longer in an era where you can depend on one thing in order to make sure that you're taken care of for the rest of your life. You cannot work for a company 30 years and then retire, and that's the end of the conversation. You can forget it. It's over. We are not in an era where you can then, as an individual, depend on yourself in order to survive and then depend on love if you decide to get married. No, you need to look at your relationship as a business first. You need 2 incomes in order for you guys to be able to live, substantiate, and survive. That's why you need to make sure that you're vetting differently than y'all have been vetting in yesteryear as far as what you're looking for in a husband or a wife. You need to make sure that you have enough money in order to be able to retire, and you can't do so off of $30 and $40 and $50 and $60,000 a year. It's not enough. When you look at the tax rates that continue to go up, I'm not dependent on Social Security in order to take care of me when I get older. If it's there, cool. If it ain't, I'm definitely not going to depend on it because we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and people are having less children, which is going to pour less into the amount of money that we need from a Social Security perspective, and we have outstanding debt as a nation. Trillions, tens of trillions of dollars in debt. You think I'm going to be dependent on Social Security even if I paid into it? Absolutely not. You need to have multiple things in the fire at a time. And that's what real diversification is. Diversification is not just based off of a financial term, right? From a financial perspective, you're better off investing in 3 things that you fully understand, and that's why you need to tap into the Patreon. Link is in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat of the 8 things that I look for when I'm looking to invest in a company. But you need to diversify your skill set because you can't just depend on working 40 hours and they looking to work 32 hours a week now. You can't depend on working 40 hours and that's going to be able to substantiate you. It's not enough.
This never used to be a problem because the UAW contract included COLA, or cost of living adjustments.
His grandfather and my father and the older members enjoyed a cost of living raise since the 1950s. So when we talk about rebuilding the middle class, COLA is an important step to do that.
COLA is essentially a raise that matches inflation. So if inflation is 4%, your salary goes up 4%. GM workers won COLA all the way back in 1948, and in the 1970s, the UAW won it for all members. But when the auto industry collapsed in 2008, the UAW sacrificed these benefits so the car companies could recover.
Because they filed for bankruptcy. And the thing about it is that when they file for bankruptcy, these are industries that still largely dependent on consumers to continue to purchase their cars. And so, in my opinion, what you see is a collapse of the entire economy and the ecosystem by which we then depend on these cars. Because A, they have to sell enough cars. B, they have to continue to innovate in order to compete globally. C, the cost of living is going up, and so the cost of cars are going up, and so less people are able to afford the cars that then pay for your salary that they didn't depend on in order to continue to grow, right? It's all interconnected. You need us to buy cars, right? You have to make those cars and you have to price them effectively to where we can actually afford them, which then gives you a job in order for you to continue to feed your family, right? But at the same time, they're negotiating for more wages, which is then going to be, again, in that chain of command, passed on to the consumer. So now, on average, most cars, the majority of the cars that's being introduced today all cost over $100,000, right? The average purchase price for a car is between like $45,000 and like $56,000. You can't find a car that's under $20,000 anymore unless you're buying a used bucket with 100,000 miles on it. You can't. Even the 96, well, that's a classic. That's a little bit different. But you can't find a car that is under $20,000, $25,000 anymore. So now you have to adjust your lifestyle. You got to move closer to work. You got to start taking a bus, start using public transportation, maybe buy a bike, walk, buy an electric bike. You have to adjust. And so the industry is going to continue to fill whatever void that's there. And that's what capitalism is. But you just simply only, and I'm not saying that the union shouldn't negotiate, because they absolutely should do what's in the best interest of the members. That's why the union is there. You support the union because the union exists, and that's what they're going to do. But if you're dependent on leadership in order to then get you your concessions so that you're able to retire based off of what it is that your grandfather and your great-grandfather did, you are sorely disillusioned. You need to have a multi-level strategy that allows for you to really be able to take into consideration what your grandchildren and their children are going to be doing. It's no longer going to be a space to where you can just graduate high school and get your kids in a plant. It's not happening. It's not happening. Them days is long gone, fam.
They came to us for the bailout. We suspended our cost of living in 2007. We were promised that after we helped the companies achieve success, that cost of living would be reinstated. Several contracts after, we're still at the situation where our cost of living was never brought back, so we all feel lied to in that regard.
The big three have more than recovered. Ford, Stellantis, and GM made a combined $20 billion in profits in just the first 6 months of this year.
Their wages have been returned. Their profits have been returned. When you see the bonuses and you see the CEO pay, all those things were returned. So
Pocket watching with JT. Hey, pocket watching with JT need to do a comparison of what CEOs make and upper management make versus what the workers make, and then do a live stream on that. That's what I would love to tune into. I would love to tune into those type of shows that do a deeper dive from a journalistic or a documentary perspective, and see those type of videos. Those are the type of things that I watch, but I understand that I'm also older and I look at things a little bit differently. I would love for us to be even more educated as far as the things that I'm interested in and that type of stuff, and then to have a debate of whether or not CEOs have earned their pay based off of what they've negotiated in their invested interest in the company, or whether or not workers have earned their pay based off of their hourly wage and then their compensation as far as on an individual profit sharing check. Let's continue.
did I make the sacrifices so Ford can continue to hire people at $16 an hour and not return our COLA? I would have struck then.
COLA was not the only benefit lost during the Great Recession. Workers hired before 2009 had pensions, healthcare when they retired, and reached their top wage within 3 years. But workers like Chris, who were hired after the economic crash, didn't get any of that.
So this is like the body shop right here. We stamp all the parts, the hoods, the fenders, all that.
That's pretty brave. That's pretty freaking brave to go on camera and jump on a video for a company that you work for and talk negatively about them. I would never do it. I would never, and maybe it's just because I work in corporate America and I'm not unionized and I understand that I'm an at-will employee. I would never in a million years jump on a video or something and talk negatively about the company that I work for. You can forget it. I would never in a million years ever do it. And let me ask another question. Here's another part of the debate that I would like to see. Is it the job's responsibility to continue to keep you satisfied? And then how much of your responsibility is it for you to continue to level up? Because in corporate America, and one of the things that I teach inside of the Patreon is that they'll always pay you more to leave when you then make yourself valuable to another company. You'll exponentially increase your pay. You'll double the amount that you make, sometimes triple the amount that you make once you get in the door, and then you leverage that experience to then go into another field or another position. I'm not really sure if working on an automotive line or even for a supplier, as an employee that's putting together the cars or drilling screws or whatever, so on and so forth, something that's easily going to be automated in the future, right? I'm not sure if we should consider those jobs anything different than what it is that we consider the workers that work at McDonald's or that work in the grocery stores or anything like that. Part of the debate is, and I know that this is not something that's a popular thing to say, now that the industry has innovated so much to where we're not interdependent on it in a way that we used to be, is it anything more than a stepping stone? Is it something that allows for you to be able to get your feet wet and then bridge the gap between, poverty and middle class? And then you're supposed to use that to continue to educate yourself so you can have it as a stepping stone and to go into something different. When I went into the steel industry in the early 2000s, when I was 18, 19 years old, I never anticipated retiring from the steel industry. I never anticipated retiring from the steel industry. I always knew that I was going to be better and richer than the thing that I was doing at that particular time. And that's not throwing shade on anybody. I think that everybody is worthy and everybody is valuable and everybody serves a purpose in this society, especially when you're doing it the right way and you're doing it legally. I ain't never shitting on the people that go to work every day and take care of business because I still have a corporate position, right? But my point is this. At what point do we start to change our mindset, not based off of how we currently live or what our grandfathers used to do, but how it is that we need to see ourselves to be able to compete long term from a global perspective? Now the opportunity is now for you to then leverage the opportunities that you have in order to become more educated and then go into different industries, especially if you're a company. If you work for a company that's willing to pay for or give you tuition assistance and you're not taking advantage of it as a benefit, then you're doing yourself a disservice. If you work for a company that's willing to give you tuition assistance, if you have not checked your benefit package or contacted human resources in order to understand what those benefits are. When I was in Rouge Steel, which is exactly where I worked for, which then changed over into a Russian company, the first thing that I did when I got my 90 days in was I contacted HR to understand exactly what the tuition assistance and compensation was, and I enrolled. And I went and enrolled in a community college, and I had them paying for my tuition. I don't understand why we're not taking advantage of that.
I'm a quality inspector, and that's where I park every single day. It took me 9.5 years to get to top pay. And not to mention going through 4 different plants in 2 different states. Even though I'm at parity in wages right now, I have no guarantee money coming in from a pension, and I have no health care when I retire that's guaranteed like everyone else.
The UAW is fighting to get rid of this tiered system in which workers doing the same job sometimes have different pay and benefits.
It is hurtful to sit next to people and make less than they do and work just as hard as they do, no matter what industry and what you're doing.
It really puts a wedge between workers on the floor, and it hurts our union. And it's hurt our union for the last 15 years. Ending tiers brings us back to a fighting labor movement.
Right now, the majority of Big Three workers are considered lower tier workers like Chris.
You know, if I'm gonna continue to be a part of this workforce that's making the companies record profits, I'd really like to be able to retire with some dignity.
Or you can go and get a different job. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't retire with some dignity. I'm talking about the fact that the minute that white people run in the Victim Olympics just like black people, sometimes even more. When I see this man right here on my screen, right, and I'm compassionate. I'm compassionate to what the demands are of the UAW. I used to be Local 600. I was Local 600. Right? A part of the Rouge plant where they make the F-150, the same facility where they was running up the steel and everything like that. I was right over there in Dearborn, Michigan, Local 600. I worked there until ultimately I didn't, until the recession in 2008. I understand. See, you're not talking to somebody that's on the outside that was always in just the top tier of corporate America my entire life. You're talking to somebody that was on the bottom and somebody that can see it from both sides. And that's why it's very difficult for people to even be able to debate me, because I don't look at it just one way. I look at it in its entirety. I look at it based off of what it was that I experienced and what I seen. And then I also look at it from the perspective of the company. And then I try to take a holistic view and a perspective that's objective based off of my opinion. And here's the reality. The minute that you realize that nobody owes you nothing, including the company that you work for, I've seen companies close down and ain't nobody get nothing. Everybody just walked away, and that was just the end of the conversation. The minute that you realize that nobody owes you nothing, I think is the minute that you start to make adjustments and you start doing the thing that's in your own best interest. And sometimes that can be striking based off of what it is that you want right now. But I also think that we need to make more informed decisions on how it is that we can adjust so that we can be successful in the future and stop being so interdependent on a company to take care of you for the rest of your life, because those days are long gone. It's over. It's over. It's not coming back. It's not going back to the way that it used to be. If that's what you're hoping for, if that's what you're waiting for, listen, God bless you. I hope that y'all get raises and promotions and both the company and you guys are profitable together. But if you're dependent on them and if you're waiting on them in order to be successful, you have to make adjustments. That's not what this is. It just is what it is, all right?